When he said he needed space, I thought it was my fault. I sat across from Daniel in our favorite little cafe, the one with chipped coffee cups and creaky wooden chairs, the place we always said felt more like home than anywhere else. And he couldn't even look at me. His fingers drummed against the table, tapping out a rhythm that didn't match the soft indie music playing overhead. I stared at him, searching his face for something, a clue, a hint, anything that could explain why the ground was suddenly shifting beneath me. I need time, he said, voice low and careful. I need to figure things out. I remember blinking at him, confused, like maybe I had misheard. We weren't perfect, of course not, but we were good. Weren't we? We made each other laugh. We talked about moving in together someday. He kissed my forehead every morning before work, whispered he loved me before we fell asleep. Hadn't he just done that 2 nights ago? I opened my mouth to ask 1,000 questions, but none of them came out. Instead, I nodded. Because what else could I do? Begging never made anyone stay. And deep down, even through the shock wrapping itself around my heart, I already knew. If someone says they need space, they're already halfway out the door. We left the cafe separately. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying to steady my breathing. Trying to tell myself it wasn't over. That this was just a rough patch. That Daniel would realize how much we meant to each other and come back. I gave him space. I didn't call. I didn't text. I waited. Each hour stretched longer than the last. Each day felt heavier. By the second night, I was a wreck. Sitting on my couch in my oldest hoodie, surrounded by tissues and half-eaten takeout containers, checking my phone every 5 minutes even though I had the volume turned all the way up. Waiting for him. Hopping. Stupid, stubborn hope. That's why when my friend Mia called me, I almost didn't pick up. I didn't want to hear anyone tell me to move on. I wasn't ready to give up yet. But something in her voice when she left a voicemail, something urgent, something almost pitying, made me hit play. And that's how I found out. Not from Daniel. Not from some painful, honest conversation where he admitted what was really going on. From Mia. Hey, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I just saw Daniel downtown. He's moving into an apartment with someone, a girl. I'm so sorry, call me when you can. The words didn't even make sense at first. I replayed the voicemail 3 times, sitting frozen in my dark living room, the TV flickering meaningless colors across my blank face. Moving in with someone. 2 days after telling me he needed space. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp and hollow, the kind of sound you make when your heart breaks so suddenly that your brain scrambles to protect itself. I don't remember much after that. I think I threw my phone across the room. I think I curled up on the floor, clutching my knees to my chest like that would keep me from falling apart completely. Spoiler, it didn't. Because nothing prepares you for that kind of betrayal. Nothing prepares you for the realization that while you were busy loving someone, believing in them, waiting for them to come back, they were already building a life without you. Choosing someone else. And they hadn't even given you the decency of an honest goodbye. They had just walked away and expected you to stay frozen in the space they left behind. I stayed on the floor for a long time that night, the clock ticking loudly in the silence, the city outside my window moving on without me. Eventually, when the tears finally ran dry and the numbness set in, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But somehow, I was going to come back from this. And when I did, I wouldn't be waiting for anyone. I would be standing on my own. Stronger, wiser, unbreakable. The days after I found out about Daniel and his new girlfriend blurred together into one long, aching stretch of time. I don't even know how I got through them, honestly. I called out sick from work for a few days, lying to my boss about having the flu when really, it was my heart that was sick, sick with betrayal, sick with humiliation, sick with the aching weight of having been replaced so easily. I barely moved from the couch. Netflix kept playing in the background, but I didn't watch it. Food lost its taste. Sleep became a stranger, slipping through my fingers every time I thought I might finally catch a few hours of escape. Everyone talks about heartbreak like it's dramatic and cinematic, sobbing in the rain, throwing things, screaming into pillows. But real heartbreak, it's quieter, lonelier, like a slow, suffocating weight pressing down on your chest every time you breathe. Mia came over once, forcing me to shower, forcing me to eat something besides crackers. She sat beside me without pushing, without filling the silence, just letting me exist in my wreckage. And somehow, that was what I needed more than anything. Not advice. Not "you'll find someone better" speeches. Just someone willing to sit with me in the dark. Still, even with her kindness, I was sinking. Worse than the sadness was the shame. Because no matter how many times I told myself that Daniel was the one who had lied, the one who had broken promises, I couldn't stop thinking about what that said about me. Was I that easy to leave? That easy to replace? Had I missed every red flag because I was too desperate to believe someone could love me without conditions? The questions looped endlessly in my head, pulling me deeper. Until one night, maybe 3 weeks after it all fell apart, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 2 a.m, staring at my own reflection like I didn't recognize the girl looking back. My skin was dull. My eyes were hollow. I looked small, broken, and standing there, gripping the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white, something inside me finally snapped. Not in the way you might expect. Not in a way that ended with smashed glass or screaming. It was quieter than that. It was a slow, rising fury. A deep, guttural rage, not at Daniel, not even at the girl he had replaced me with, but at myself. At the part of me that had been willing to believe I wasn't enough. At the part of me that had been willing to stay curled up in misery while the world kept spinning without me. I deserved better. Not from him. From myself. I didn't want to be this version of me anymore, the version who measured her worth by whether or not someone else chose her. I was done waiting for closure. Done waiting for an apology. Done waiting for him to realize what he lost. I wanted my life back. No, scratch that. I wanted to build a life that would make everything he threw away seem small and meaningless in comparison. I wiped my face, straightened my back, and made a decision. Not a loud one. A quiet, stubborn one. I was going to heal. I was going to grow. I was going to become someone even I was proud of. Not because of him, but because I deserved to be proud of myself. The next morning, when the sun finally cracked through the gray sky and spilled into my tiny apartment, I did something radical. I made a list. Not a list of revenge fantasies. Not a list of things I hated about him. A list of things I wanted to reclaim. My body. My mind. My dreams. My peace. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Small. Fragile. But real. I taped the list to my fridge. And that was the day, though I didn't know it yet, that everything started to change. Not overnight. Not all at once. But steadily. Quietly. Powerfully. Because healing doesn't come in grand declarations. It comes in small, stubborn steps toward yourself. And I was ready to take the first one. The first real step wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some cinematic moment where I woke up, threw open the curtains, and became a whole new person. It was smaller than that. I got out of bed. I made a cup of coffee. I showered. And when the doubt crept back in, when the whispers started, reminding me that I had been left behind, replaced, I answered them out loud. No, I said, standing barefoot in my kitchen, mug trembling slightly in my hands. No more. It felt silly at first, talking back to thoughts. But it worked a little. It gave me just enough room to breathe. I went for a walk that afternoon. Just around the block. Just enough to feel the sun on my face, the air filling my lungs properly again. I hadn't realized how small my world had become since Daniel left. How much I had shrunk to fit inside my sadness. But the world was still out there. Big, messy, alive, and I wanted to be part of it again. I started saying yes to things I had been avoiding. Lunch with Mia. Volunteering at a local animal shelter. Dusting off my old journal and scribbling messy, angry, hopeful words late into the night. I wasn't magically healed. I still cried sometimes, quietly, when a song came on the radio or when I passed the coffee shop where he had broken my heart. But the crying didn't own me anymore. It was just something that happened. Like rainstorms. Temporary. Survivable. One evening, a few weeks into my slow rebuild, I found an old sketchbook shoved into the back of my closet. Art had once been my escape, a part of me that felt private and sacred. I hadn't picked up a pencil in over a year. Daniel used to tease me about it, called it a hobby for kids. Not cruelly. Just dismissively. Enough to make me set it aside. That night I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, sketching for hours. At first my hand was stiff, clumsy. But then the lines loosened. The images flowed. It felt like coming home to a part of myself I had locked away without even realizing. I stayed up until 2 a.m, surrounded by scraps of paper, graphite smudges all over my fingers, feeling more alive than I had in months. It wasn't just about drawing. It was about remembering who I had been before him. Someone creative. Someone curious. Someone brave enough to dream without asking permission. That realization cracked something open inside me. If I could find my way back to that girl, piece by messy piece, maybe I could find my way forward too. I started setting tiny goals for myself. Not move on or fall in love again, those felt too big, too heavy. Simple things. Walk a little farther each day. Finish a sketch every week. Smile at strangers even when it felt awkward. Start looking for a job that actually excited me instead of just paying the bills. The goals were small enough that failure didn't feel catastrophic. Small enough that success felt monumental. And slowly, almost without noticing, I started to gather momentum. My apartment looked less like a disaster zone and more like a place someone lived in again. I laughed more. I slept better. I caught myself humming while doing the dishes one night and had to sit down because I really realized, that happiness was starting to creep back in. Not because my life was perfect, but because I was showing up for myself again. Choosing myself again. And that felt like the kind of love story I could actually believe in. I didn't know what the future looked like yet. I wasn't rushing to fill the empty spaces Daniel had left behind with someone new. I wasn't trying to pretend it had never happened. I was just healing. One small, stubborn step at a time. And for the first time, that was enough. It's strange how life starts to expand again once you stop clinging to what's gone. Little by little, the world that had felt so small after Daniel left started to crack open, letting new light pour in. I didn't even notice at first. I was too busy surviving, marking off my small goals, stacking them like stepping stones across the rubble of my old life. But momentum has a way of building itself if you just keep moving. One afternoon, while scrolling mindlessly through job boards, I stumbled across a posting that made me sit up straighter. A junior design position at a local creative agency, a real one. Not corporate marketing sludge. Not something soul-crushing just to pay rent. A place where ideas mattered. Where art mattered. I almost clicked away out of habit, that old whisper in the back of my mind, warning me not to want too much, not to reach too high. But then I remembered who planted that voice there. And I clicked apply. It felt reckless. Wild. Electric. I stayed up half the night polishing my portfolio, breathing life back into pieces I hadn't touched in years, adding fresh sketches, new work born from the sleepless nights and raw honesty that heartbreak had carved out of me. When I hit submit, I expected to feel terrified. Instead, I felt free. 2 days later, they called me for an interview. I almost cried when I hung up the phone, not because I thought I had already won, but because someone, somewhere, saw potential in me before I even walked through the door. The interview was a blur of nervous laughter and sweaty palms. But when they asked me why I wanted the job, the answer came easily. Because I'm ready, I said, surprising even myself with the steady certainty in my voice. I'm ready to build something real. And I was. Not just a career. A life. 2 weeks later, they offered me the position. I stood in my kitchen reading the email, heart pounding so loud I almost didn't hear the words in my own head. You did this. You. Not because of Daniel. Not because anyone saved you. Because you fought for yourself when it would have been easier to stay broken. Because you chose yourself. I started the job the next month. It wasn't always smooth. There were days I doubted myself, days I stumbled, days I wondered if I was in over my head. But I never stopped showing up. And every time I finished a project, every time a client praised my work, every time a coworker asked for my opinion because they actually respected me, another broken piece inside me stitched itself back together. My life wasn't about what I had lost anymore. It was about what I was creating. New friendships formed slow and genuine. I filled my weekends with art shows, hiking trips, messy brunches that turned into lazy afternoons. I said yes to things that scared me, improv classes, volunteer projects, speaking up in meetings when I had something to say. And every time fear tried to drag me back into the shadows, I reminded myself. You've already survived worse. You are more than what he left behind. One rainy Saturday morning, I found myself in a tiny coffee shop on the edge of town, sketching ideas for a mural project a local nonprofit had asked me to help with. I looked up from my sketchbook, watching the rain streak down the windows, the world outside soft and blurred. And I really realized, that I hadn't thought about Daniel in weeks. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just nothing. He didn't own a piece of me anymore. He didn't get to shape my days, my choices, my dreams. He was just someone I used to know. Someone who had exited the story long before it got good. And as I sipped my coffee and filled blank pages with new colors, new possibilities, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because healing had been quick or easy. But because I had done it. I had built a life he couldn't even imagine, a life that didn't need him, didn't miss him, didn't even remember him most days. A life that belonged fully, completely, unapologetically to me. And I was just getting started. It happened when I least expected it. Life was good, really good. I was months into my new job, finally feeling like I belonged there. I had my favorite coffee shop, my tiny but cozy apartment, my sketchbook spilling across the kitchen table like living proof that I was building something that mattered. Daniel was a shadow in my rearview mirror, so distant now that most days I didn't even glance back. So when I spotted him one evening at the grocery store, it took me a second to even register who he was. I was standing in the produce section, debating between 2 kinds of apples when I heard his laugh. I froze, the apples slipping from my fingers, bouncing gently across the floor. There he was. 3 aisles over. Talking to someone, not the girl he had moved in with, but someone else entirely. For a moment I just stared. Not because I missed him. Not because I wanted him back. But because he looked different. Smaller somehow. His shoulders slumped a little. His eyes a little tired. He didn't seem cruel or triumphant or even particularly happy. He just looked like a guy picking up groceries on a Wednesday night, living a life that had nothing to do with me anymore. And in that moment, I realized something huge. I didn't hate him. I didn't love him. I didn't feel much of anything at all. It wasn't the grand cinematic encounter I had imagined in my lowest moments, no dramatic speech, no triumphant hair flip and storming away. It was quieter. Sadder, maybe. But also infinitely better. Because the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And standing there under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers, I felt the last thread that tethered me to Daniel quietly snap. Gone. I bent down, scooped up the apples, smoothed my hair, and turned to leave. But of course, fate being what it is, that's when he spotted me. Hey, he called out, his voice cutting across the hum of the store. I could have pretended not to hear him. Could have kept walking. But I didn't. I turned. I smiled, small, polite. Hey. He looked awkward, shifting from foot to foot like a boy caught doing something wrong. For a second, he opened his mouth like he was about to say something important. Maybe he was about to apologize. Maybe he was about to explain everything. But honestly, I didn't care. I didn't need it. He must have seen that in my face because he stopped. His mouth snapped shut. He gave a sheepish little nod. Hope you're doing good, he mumbled. And before I could even answer, he turned and walked away. No drama. No fireworks. Just two people who used to love each other, now nothing more than strangers passing in a grocery store. I stood there for a second longer, feeling strangely calm. Then I smiled to myself, tossed the apples into my basket, and walked toward the checkout line. Life didn't need a dramatic ending to be beautiful. Sometimes closure isn't something you get from someone else. Sometimes it's something you give yourself. That night, as I curled up on my couch with a cup of tea, sketchbook open across my knees, I felt lighter than I had in a long, long time. Not because he had finally said the right thing, but because I didn't need him to say anything at all. I had already built my own peace. Brick by messy, beautiful brick. And no one could take that away from me. Not anymore. After that night at the grocery store, something in me clicked into place permanently. It wasn't just that I had moved on from Daniel. It was that I had finally, truly remembered who I was without him, and even more importantly, who I could still become. I stopped thinking so small. I stopped apologizing for wanting things that once felt too big for me to even say out loud. I started dreaming again. Really dreaming. One night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a mess of papers and pens spread out around me, I scribbled a wild idea at the top of a clean page. Start my own design studio. I stared at the words for a long time. Part of me wanted to laugh. What did I know about running a business? I barely kept a succulent alive. But another part of me, a louder, bolder part, whispered, why not you? I had spent so much of my life shrinking to fit someone else's version of who I was supposed to be. I wasn't doing that anymore. I was allowed to take up space. Allowed to want things. Big things. Wild things. And maybe I would fail. Maybe it would be messy and terrifying and way harder than I could even imagine. But wasn't that better than building my life around fear? I started small like I always had. Researching. Sketching out ideas. Talking to people who had built things from scratch, letting their stories fuel my own stubborn hope. It took months. Late nights. Early mornings. Doubt creeping in through the cracks some days, trying to whisper me back into safety. But I kept going. Because every step forward was a middle finger to the girl who used to believe she wasn't good enough. Every step forward was proof that I was still writing my story, and I got to decide how it ended. I launched my own design business quietly one sunny Saturday morning. No big announcement. No fanfare. Just a simple post on social media. A small website built with my own hands. A nervous, hopeful breath held in my chest. And slowly the world responded. Friends reached out first, asking for logos, invitations, small projects. Then friends of friends. Then people I had never even met before, trusting me with their dreams. The work wasn't glamorous at first. It was messy and overwhelming and exhausting. But it was mine. Every project, every deadline, every win and every mistake. Mine. The freedom of that nearly brought me to tears some nights. And not the desperate, broken tears of the girl curled up on the bathroom floor after Daniel left. These were different. They were tears of pride. Tears of possibility. Tears of becoming. There were moments when the old fear tried to claw its way back in. Late nights when invoices were slow. Quiet weeks when projects dried up. But I had faced worse. I had survived worse. And I reminded myself again and again that fear didn't get to be the driver anymore. Hope did. Courage did. I did. One afternoon, after wrapping up a project for a small local bookstore, I stood in the middle of my tiny home office, surrounded by colorful prints and notebooks full of ideas, and realized I had built a life that wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. It was about creating. Loving. Dreaming without apology. The version of me that Daniel had left behind, scared, shattered, unsure, she was still part of me. I honored her every time I chose to keep going. But she wasn't the main character anymore. I was. And I wasn't just surviving my heartbreak. I was building something beautiful from it. Something he would never touch. Never ruin. Never even fully understand. Because it wasn't for him. It was for me. And as I closed my laptop, pulled on my sneakers, and headed out into the world, head high, heart steady, I smiled. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The best parts of my story were still unwritten. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. The first anniversary of the breakup came and went without me even noticing. I realized it a few days later, flipping through my calendar, pausing at the date that had once been burned into my brain like a scar. And instead of feeling a pang of sadness or anger or regret, I smiled. Because life had gotten so full, so rich, so beautifully mine, that I didn't even need to mark the day he left anymore. I had bigger things to celebrate now. The launch of my studio. The art show I had been invited to participate in. The friendships that had deepened, strengthened by the fires we had all walked through together. The way I could wake up in the morning, breathe deep, and really know that my happiness wasn't fragile anymore. It wasn't tied to anyone else's choices. It lived inside me. And that realization, that quiet, bone-deep certainty, was worth more than any apology Daniel could have ever given me. One evening, just before sunset, I walked to my favorite hill overlooking the city. It was something I did often now, a small ritual, a way to check in with myself when the world got too loud. The skyline stretched out before me, glittering gold in the fading light, every building a testament to something someone once only dreamed of. I thought about how scared I had been to rebuild. How convinced I had been that I wasn't strong enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't enough, period. And yet here I was. Still standing. Still dreaming. Still growing. Not despite what had happened. Because of it. Heartbreak had cracked me open. Loss had burned away the pieces of me that had been too small, too afraid, too willing to settle. And in their place, something stronger had grown. Not harder. Not colder. Just stronger. Softer too, in the ways that mattered, in the ways that let me love the world again, without fear that it might shatter me. I thought about the girl who had sat on her living room floor, clutching her phone in her hands, waiting for a message that never came. I wished I could reach back through time and whisper to her, "You won't just survive this. You'll become someone you're proud of. You'll build a life that feels like sunlight. You'll stop waiting for someone to save you because you'll realize you were always the hero of your own story." I stayed on that hill until the sun sank behind the horizon, the sky bleeding into shades of pink and purple and deep, endless blue. And when I finally stood up to head home, I carried something new with me, something I hadn't even known I was still looking for. Peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending the past didn't hurt. Not the kind that demands forgetting. The kind that honors what you survived without letting it define you. The kind that says you are whole now. Maybe Daniel found his version of happiness. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. His story had stopped being my concern a long time ago. And my story, wild, messy, brave, was only just beginning. I walked home slowly, letting the night wrap around me, smiling at strangers, humming under my breath. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly where the next year, or 5 years, or 10 years would take me. But I trusted myself to find out. Because if I could survive the worst nights of my life, if I could rebuild from the ashes of someone else's betrayal, if I could learn to love the girl staring back at me in the mirror, scars and all, then there was nothing I couldn't do. Nothing I couldn't become. And that truth, that fierce, shining truth, was better than any apology, any closure, any validation I had once begged for. It was mine. Fully, fiercely, forever mine. And as I stepped inside my little apartment, switching on the warm light, feeling the quiet hum of home around me, I smiled to myself one last time. I didn't just survive him leaving. I became the person he never had the vision to imagine. I became the person I had always been meant to be. And I was only getting started.